Welcome everyone to another episode of Live from the Black Library. Today I am here joined by...
The Sandman? Was I supposed to cut in there?
Yeah, don't worry.
Sorry, I didn't know that.
No, don't worry, it's fine. I'll just leave this all in. People know the show's a mess anyway. No one's gonna be surprised. Okay. Now see, that's a pretty long name, The Sandman. 3 syllables? Too much. Can I just call you Man?
Sure. Yeah, in England, we call everyone man, so it's like, that's just a very colloquial way of referring to a person.
Just man. Because that I found myself saying that a lot while doing research for this episode about Lionel Johnson. I just kept reading new things, and every time I'm just thinking, man. Like, he has this, air about him of being so stoic and cool, but in reality, the dude's a bit of a fucking mess. But before we get into the topic of today's episode, why don't you tell the people at home a little bit about yourself? How is it you got into 40k, and what do you do on YouTube?
Yeah, so, my name's Ed, the Sandman, as I'm known on YouTube by a handful of people. And, I got into Warhammer 40k as, a kid. I got in through, the very traditional route, as I think a lot of people have, where I was a big fan of Lord of the Rings as a kid, and then I started collecting those minis, and then eventually... I got into 40k. A friend of mine actually gave me an Ultramarines box, and it was all painted, and I painted over all of the models in the Size of the Emperor scheme, which is a very difficult scheme that I did not do justice to. And eventually, I got into Tau. Tau was the first army. I was like, oh my god, this is so cool. Blah blah blah. Then when I got older, all my friends just played fantasy, so I played Bretonians. And then it's like, you realize girls exist and alcohol exists, and you kind of stop playing, and then you become an adult, and
you realize girls exist.
Yeah, you have disposable income, and all of a sudden you get back into it, and I started reading the Horus Heresy and fell deeply in love with the Dark Angels that last to this day.
I see. That's really interesting, and I think that's how old are you? Roughly?
Roughly.
Roughly. If in case you don't want to say your direct
I'm not
age.
entirely sure. No one knows, but it has been said I'm around the age of 27.
I see. Yeah, it's been retconned several times.
Yeah, exactly.
Just last year, this guy said he was 26. So what's the fucking huh? Keep your fucking story straight, man.
Exactly.
God.
Exactly.
You're just a little bit older than me. I think a lot of people are actually surprised by how old I am. A lot of people tend to assume I'm younger. I've had a lot of people assume I'm 18, 19 tops. Don't worry, I am deteriorating far more rapidly than that.
Why is that? Is that... do you take that as a compliment? Is that you look very young for your age, or is that
Yeah, it's with me. It's I look pretty young for my age.
Okay, well, that's good. That's a good thing.
Here's the thing.
When you're 40, you'll be like, I am so happy that I still look 25. When I'm 40, I'll look 50, and that would be terrible.
I was driving once, and then a kid on the sidewalk with his friends, he looked like some middle schooler, just pointed at me and said, "That guy looks so damn young." I think they thought I had stolen a car, I was underage or something like that.
Wow.
And
okay.
I think it's my voice too. I don't really have a very deep or rich voice or anything like that. So I think
you have a great voice. You have a very deep voice.
Really? Thank you.
I don't know. Maybe you're putting it on. Maybe you are actually a middle schooler, and you're just on a podcast pretending to have a deep voice.
Fuck! He knows too much.
Yeah.
I'm busted. No, it's it's because I've actually worked to sort of cultivate, I guess, a deeper, richer quality to my voice, because the first thing I ever really got into in terms of internet personalityism was doing a little bit of voice work and voice acting.
Oh,
and
awesome.
That's something I need to get back into.
You also need to do that for 40k. That's great. That's so cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I used to dub 40k memes on my channel.
Yeah, I've seen them. Yeah, that's awesome. Man. Yeah, but you should do. There's a lot of great speeches in Warhammer 40k, especially the Horus Heresy. So you should do those.
Mm-hmm.
I've always thought someone should do those.
Oh yeah, I really should. I really should. I was always doing memes, but there are a few things I would like to do almost audiobook, almost sort of pseudo, because there are some people who do that, like Grimdark Narrator and so on. But getting back on topic, that's where I got my start on YouTube, was doing memes. And like I started doing audio recording memes, and then I started doing memes in iMovie where I would put heads of Warhammer characters over video clips. You yourself, you're a lore YouTuber, and like I think your really big thing, you have a few traditional videos, but your big thing is shorts. And I think that's something that's that's something that's really taken off on YouTube. Like, a lot of people, when shorts first started coming out, were really skeptical of it and didn't like it.
Yeah,
but it's absolutely exploded. Yeah, like
it was weird.
Like you and Deadlifts for the Dark Gods, to name a few, do really well with those really short, really informative videos.
Yeah, they are. It's a weird thing. So, actually, most of my channel, if you go onto my channel, you'll see most of my videos are actually kind of competitively focused. Well, I say competitively, I'm not like a top player or anything like that, but like they're about the game, and I love the game of Warhammer 40k, and I play it quite a lot, and I love to talk about strategy and tactics, and when new factions get new rules, I go crazy for that stuff. I love that, so I love making videos around that, but I also love the lore, and I read a lot of Warhammer 40k, which is kind of counterintuitive because doing both on one channel actually weirdly hurts the channel. There's a very small amount of crossover between those two communities, which is something I find quite interesting. But like I originally did a bunch of shorts because Wes Hammer, of course, made an amazing kind of impact on the community. And like I think like Major Kill did a video on him like a long time ago, and it was like, you know, there's a Warhammer content creator who's bigger than anyone you've ever heard, something like that, and it was about Wes Hammer because I think he had
he got his start on TikTok. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. Because
so, like, a lot of people on YouTube
haven't
heard of him.
But he had like 750,000 followers or something like that on TikTok. Yeah. Which I think is technically even more than like Lewitton, but TikTok has got more generally has a big drama around it. How it doesn't really pay anybody, and then Wes Hammer moved to YouTube and it blew up. But when Wes Hammer was originally kind of really big, like and I think probably most people on YouTube was like, you know what, I'll try and do some shorts because this is clearly doing well. And I didn't, like everyone, I don't care massively about TikTok because the audience is there's not a lot of Warhammer people on TikTok, I don't think. But I did a bunch, and they all kind of didn't do very well. They weren't very worth it. And then I did like maybe a dozen, and honestly, for like you say, people weren't very keen on them. For that original like 12 or so, I would say I would post one, and about 75% of the time, if I would go back within a couple of hours to see how the video's doing, my subscriber count would drop. People would, because people just go like, oh, this guy's clearly a shorts content now, I'm not going to watch him, blah blah blah. So that changed, and so after that happened, like like I say, probably 8 or so times. Like after that, I was kind of like, well, I'll just leave it. But then I left it about a year, and I saw like there were a bunch of people doing shorts now, and they were doing really well. So I was like, you know what, I'll try it again. And there was like a shift in the community. For some reason, people, I don't know, it just takes a while. I think people all of a sudden maybe give something a go.
That's something I've noticed with shorts. Like even when I would do them for like memes and voice dubs, is the shorts actually do really well, but not immediately. Like it'll take a few weeks or even like a month or something, and then they'll just explode as they get like picked up. Like it doesn't happen in the traditional sense where there's that initial spike and then it tapers off.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I don't know if this is boring for your listeners, so I apologize, but like in terms of how the YouTube works, it's been kind of fascinating because YouTube will push the short to loads of people who don't play Warhammer. So like I can see the videos where my videos are being recommended, and it's the most like random content you've ever heard of in your life. And then every time, eventually, Google figures out, hey, maybe I've noticed this video is doing quite well with people who like Warhammer 40,000, and then it pushes it to those people.
Why could that be? It's a fucking mystery. God knows.
It's so weird. It doesn't have that. It doesn't like seem to retain that information each time I post a video. It's very odd. I don't get it. Yeah, like you say, it can take weeks.
Yeah. But that it's almost like the YouTube algorithm doesn't properly understand the internal workings of the Warhammer community. And you know who else doesn't properly understand internal workings of anybody? It's the topic of today's video, Lionel Johnson.
Nice, smooth transition. I like it. That was good.
Skill. This show is the only thing I use my journalism degree for. This is all I have. God. Ugh. But looking at a cursory look at Lionel Johnson, you really like him, right? You're a big fan of his?
Oh, I'm a big fan. I'm a Lion fan all the way.
Okay, like, and
I'm literally like, given how you've introduced him so far, I'm currently shaking. I'm ready to argue with you. I'm good to go. Like,
oh, I'm gonna get so fucked. The thing is, first looking into Lionel Johnson is to look at actually his name, because what some people might not realize is that the name Lionel Johnson actually means Lion the Johnson, and as Johnson, as we all know, means penis. And so you are an outspoken fan of lion penis, is that true? You're on record as a big appreciator of lion penis?
I've nothing against lion penis. That's all I'll say.
I see. That's on record now. Oh god. No, in reality, the name, it actually means lion son of the forest. Because he crash landed when all the Primarchs essentially got thrown into their space during a bout of, like, I think it's called maternal depression or maternal mania, when a woman goes crazy after having kids. Like, that's essentially what happened to Erda. She just yeeted all the Primarchs into space. And Lionel Johnson, he crash landed on a really awful planet right outside the Eye of fucking Terror called Caliban. And it was covered with these gigantic, horrible warp beasts and had a small contingent of dedicated knights whose job it was to protect the people from them. Now, it's said that, like, he immediately had to fend for himself and started, you know, having to kill and fight these beasts on his own and essentially became feral. Now, I always forget whenever I read about these things that the Primarchs grow preternaturally fast. So I just imagine a fucking toddler or like a kindergartner having to wrestle with like a lion that's like 3 times the size of normal and just winning. Like baby Hercules from the movie. He's kill the giant thing. I always forget they grow. They're like, Primarchs like adult size by the age of like 10.
Yeah, they do mature very quickly. Yeah.
It's like fucking dog years or something. But like, he was found by this order of knights, namely the leader of the knights, Luther. And I'm sure Luther would never go on to regret finding him. I'm sure that would always be a positive thing. You know, he would look back and say, "Man, that was great. That was the happiest day of my life."
Yeah, absolutely. No regrets.
I need the fucking Always Sunny in Philadelphia, one of those Always Sunny in Philadelphia title cards. Luther fucking regrets it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Like,
I mean, Luther was the head honcho in the order at the time, and you know, he was himself this legendary character, this once in a generation knight that was amazingly talented at slaying these beasts. And all of a sudden, Lionel Johnson comes up, who is, of course, you know, 10 times the man that he is.
Oh, like, that's the thing. It was often said that Luther is this, he's mythic, as you said. He's going to unite all the orders of the knights and unite Caliban and free Caliban. And then you get side charactered. Like, that's a thing that happens in stories. You'll meet, like, a side character or, like, a secondary character in a story. And you think, man, in any other situation, you would absolutely be the protagonist.
Oh, see Marnie's Calgar. For reference. Like... Yeah, I like Marnie's Calgar, and he got a deal with Disney, which, you know, fair play. Life could be worse, but at the same time, you read Dark Imperium, and you're just like, oh, dude, what happened to you? Like, yeah, when I was a kid, 40k was a huge part of 40k was the story of Marnie's Calgar versus Abaddon the Despoiler, and now he's just a chapter master. It's crazy to think about it. He loses on Vigilus, basically.
So Lionel Johnson. He rose up through the ranks of the Order, eventually united all the orders, and then the one order that wasn't entirely on board, he just wiped them out. He's like, he didn't think, oh, you guys can just do your own thing. No, you have to die. And he just killed all of them.
Knights of Lupus.
Like, the Knights of Lupus. Like,
not entirely.
Not entirely?
Not entirely, I will say.
Oh.
I won't spoil what happens, but they're not entirely wiped out. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad he didn't entirely wipe them out. There we go. Truly, the hero we all deserve. But what happened was that sort of spawned the stirrings of jealousy within Luther as he started to get shafted more and more. And you know what? I get it. I absolutely get it. I've kind of been there. I was a hardcore theater kid in like all the way through middle school and high school. And it actually happened once that I was gonna get one of the lead roles in a play as like the school bully. And then a guy who was like better than me. I'll say it. He was better than me. Like, he was taller than me. He fit the role better. No, he just accidentally stumbled in, like, obliviously. This guy, he stumbled in to the a rehearsal. We had already cast everything. He stumbled into a fucking rehearsal. He's like, "Oh, what's going on here?" We're like, "Oh, we're short a player. Can you come on in?" And he was playing one of my, like, because I was the school bully, and he was playing, like, one of my dumb hanger-ons. And then he fit the role so well. Like, his delivery was so much better than mine, and he was taller than me. He was one of those kids who's just, like, inordinately jacked, despite, like, you really shouldn't be. He was one of those. So he actually got given my role, and I ended up as his dumb hanger-on. I was like, oh, I couldn't complain, because I was playing, like, 2 different parts in that play. So I had a costume. It was actually easier for me, because it was easier for me to play 2 side characters than 1 main character and a side character. But, like, still, that was wild. Someone just walked in. If I was a pettier man, I would be so mad. Like, he wasn't, like, an ass about it, because I've had people who have gotten better roles than me and been an ass about it, because I was always typecast as a villain. In every single production I've been, I've always been a bad guy. Like, I just have bad guy vibes. That's something I've been told. That's something I've been told even in normal everyday life. People are like, yeah, you kind of have, like, bad guy vibes. There's a lot of actors like that,
yeah. Maybe you can play Luther.
Oh, God. You know what? Maybe I could, if I'm being honest. Maybe if we ever get to the live action that we keep getting assured is coming. Like, people keep telling us, there's a show coming, there's a show in the works. I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when we're 3 seasons deep. Yeah. Like, but eventually, Lion united the planet. Then the Emperor came along after everything was said and done, and he said, "Hey, you're my son. You've clearly proven yourself." He didn't need to prove himself in the Emperor's eyes like some of the other Primarchs did. He just sort of was immediately brought into the fold because the Emperor acknowledged his skill immediately and gifted him a ship called a Gloriana-class battleship called the Invincible Reason. Could you imagine that? Like, what kind of name is the Invincible Reason? Imagine your long-lost dad shows up from, like, God knows where. Like, "Hi, I'm your dad. Here's a pickup truck named the Facts and Logic."
I mean, it fits the Lion's character very well. He is pragmatic to an incredible degree.
Yeah, and he's also consistently wrong in the lore. There's also a lot of moments where he's just is wrong.
I mean, that's very Primarch, but yeah, I don't know if you can attribute that just to him.
"Here I come on the Invincible Reason, here to destroy your woke sky." That's the second time I've made the woke sky joke in one of these. I did it in the Tau episode too.
Okay.
Essentially, the Dark Angels are known for being, like, a really effective legion, but when Lion found them on his Facts and Logic ship, he found them essentially in shit condition. They were just a bunch of vain douchebags, and scattered across the galaxy in separate campaigns. He had to go on a crusade by himself to scrape everyone up, and then beat the shit out of every single company captain to gain the respect of everyone and say, "Look, you dumb motherfuckers, listen to me. Stop." And eventually, he did. He had to beat the shit out of everyone.
The Dark Angels, in a lot of ways, were the prototype legion. So they are the legion on which all other legions were based. They were literally the first one made. And so, actually, a lot of the things that Space Marines do today in 40k, they do because that's what the Dark Angels originally decided. And in terms of how they operated based on that time, a lot of that comes from the Emperor himself, because they worked with the Emperor solely, and the Custodians, of course, for a time there.
Yeah, to wipe out the Thunder Warriors.
Wipe out the Thunder Warriors, and the initial crusades to take over the rest of the Sol system.
Like, they were the first Legion created, but they were not actually the first Primarchs found or brought into the Imperium's fold.
No, but he is the first Primarch, and in a lot of ways he is, and this is kind of one of the big criticisms of the Lion, I think, is that he's essentially too good in the story. He is at multiple times said to just be the best Primarch, and he is at multiple times said to kind of be the template from which all the other Primarchs are made. Which, if you're a fan of any other Space Marine chapter, is not something you really want to hear. But unfortunately, writers get a lot of. It's not something I would have even said, because for example, there's a bit in the Lion's Primarch novel where there's a someone in the Iron Wing, I think it is, makes a fortress, and the Lion says like, "This is as fine a fortress as anyone in the Imperial Fists could make," and it's kind of like, oh, I mean that's a bit much. Do you know what I mean? Because they're almost too perfect. But actually, the idea that they're all fuck-ups, I'm gonna have to pull you up on that. I don't think that's fair.
Like, you buddy. So you got to stay in your lane there. Now, hang on. The last person to say some shit like that is one of fucking Perturabo's boys. We know how that goes. Yeah, like I think that's an unfair assessment saying the Lion is too good, because I actually think he's a really well-written character in that he does have a fair few amount of flaws, and they're consistent flaws. Like there's a consistent thing with him, as opposed to just having like a few character traits like, oh, he works too hard, he cares about people too much.
For
like
sure.
No, the big thing with him is like I looks at the guy, I'm reading about the guy, and I'm like, wow, this guy seems pretty autistic, if I'm being honest.
Well, he actually has depth that the other kind of Primarchs don't. So I think you do hit the nail on the head. I will say one of the problems with the Lion is that so I believe it's been a while since I read them, but I believe I'm right in saying this. I think every single Horus Heresy book where the Dark Angels appear is written by a different author, and that presents some challenges, because that ends up meaning the case that the Lion doesn't actually learn from some of the lessons in the previous books, and that's a bit annoying. However, as you say, in terms of like his relationship with Guilliman, it's a genuinely interesting relationship for the Primarchs, because any other Primarchs loyalist working together are basically almost entirely aligned. They're just so virtuous and brilliant constantly. It's
yes, we are very much on the same page here. But I think the friction the Lion has with not just Guilliman, but also Leman Russ is incredibly interesting.
Oh, it's my favorite part of 40k lore. Yeah.
We'll get into that a little more. But as I was saying, when I say the Lion seems like autistic, I'm not trying to like sound ableist or wrong or like inappropriate when I say that. Like, it's literally stated, like he says this himself, that he's only at home on the battlefield when he can sit, view statistics, plan battles, this and that, organizational capability, and lead his troops through ironclad example, but he just cannot understand the emotions of other people. Like, it does not occur to him why someone else might be upset. And it's not that he's unempathetic, like, it just mentally does not occur to him. And as someone who, like, people, like, a lot of professionals and people with those professional opinions have diagnosed me with a lot of traits that are congruent or comorbid with autism. So, like, I get it, I really understand. And like I know a lot of autistic people. I have a lot of autistic friends who do share some of those traits. Like, they're really good at one thing, but they can't really understand some of the intricacies of human interaction. Like, a good example is it doesn't really occur to him why Leman Russ needs to kill this guy who essentially called him a fucking poodle. Like, one guy who was fighting against the Imperium decided to call Leman Russ, like, yeah, you're the Emperor's lapdog. Like, yeah, you're a little like shit poodle or something like that. And it doesn't occur to him why it's so important for Leman Russ to personally murder the guy. So he does it.
I think we can unpack that a bit. So, like, you have to remember with Lionel Johnson that he was, as you've said already, he was put on a planet with chaos beasts on it, where he raised himself in a forest, and he didn't meet anybody until he was a grown man. At which point Luther sees him like run across the road naked, essentially. And so, like, the Lion was also the firstborn son of the Emperor of Mankind. So to the Chaos Gods, this was the ultimate prize. This was something they really wanted. They really wanted the Lion to turn traitor, and they bombarded him with Chaos Beasts for like a decade or longer. And so it was a massive impact on how it's going to be. And then when he finally reunites with his father, the Emperor of Mankind, the Emperor says to him that your role amongst the Primarchs is to be their exterminator. So I don't know if this is widely known, but so Leman Russ, as we know, is the executioner. Shit. Lionel Johnson's role is the exterminator. So if things ever go so badly wrong that the Emperor wants to start over again, he trusts the Lion to wipe the galaxy clean so that they can start over. And he gives the Lion numerous technologies in order to accomplish those aims. And so that's his starting point for getting on with his brothers.
I never knew that. That's really interesting. I never knew that. Imagine being told that by your dad, like, yes, my sons, you are all here together. We are all a family. And then he just takes you aside and hands you like a fucking loaded 38. If anyone starts acting up, use it.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Lehman Russ story, the Lehman Russ Primarch novel is really good, and I love Russ as a character. The funny thing about Lehman Russ is that Lehman Russ is constantly described to be a genius, because the Black Library authors love this idea, as we all do, that Lehman Russ is secretly one of the smartest Primarchs. And he puts on this, visage of like a savage, but actually he's not. He's incredibly intelligent. The problem is Lehman Russ actually he consistently does stupid things in the books, and that book is absolutely paramount for it. So that book starts off with like Lehman Russ having a dialogue with, I think it's someone in the Grey Company or something like that, and he's saying how, like, our Malcador thinks I'm an idiot, the High Lords of Terror think I'm an idiot, and so does Lehman Russ. We're going to prove them that I'm just not like a rabid dog. We're not going to charge in there headlong, cause a bunch of damage, blah blah blah. They then arrive and they immediately charge in headlong and do a bunch of damage.
The thing. He's
and to that
really,
point, he
really
actually,
smart.
I got to get this out. Sorry, man. He actually kills 10 like a squad of Dark Angels. Lehman Russ just murders them instantly. Oh, and the Lion is obviously not very happy about this, and to show the restraint of Lionel Johnson, he fires upon Russ's ship, but basically just to distract him. And so Lehman Russ hails him as like, "Why are you firing on my ship?" And the Lion,
"Why are you firing on my sons?"
As to how he's just murdered a bunch of his sons. And then Lehman Russ goes, "Okay, shit. I'd better go and apologise." So he goes to the Invincible Reason to apologises. And you want to talk about not understanding social interaction. Lehman Russ actually threatens the Lion at this stage. He threatens him and says, "If you fire on my ship ever again, I will kill you." And it's like, you've just murdered his children. How can you be so socially inept? So honestly,
God.
Sorry.
Why are you saying that?
You can't put that on the Lion. I think a lot of the Primarchs struggle when it comes to interactions.
Like fucking fatherless behavior. Yeah, I get it. These people did not have a good parent model, if I'm being honest. I get it. Like, that's the thing. Like, Lionel Johnson, it's like he's not like a sociopath or something where empathy is completely beyond him.
Oh, for sure.
Just it is clear that he does seem to struggle in that aspect. Like,
but when you actually take him as sum total, which is this person who really struggles in these relationships with his brothers, which is something I find genuinely interesting to read. Oh yeah. There are very good reasons for that, and so it kind of makes him just an interesting character, and that's why I am always surprised with the degree to which people dismiss the Lion.
Oh yeah, like that. I've seen that as like a blanket dismissal of the Lion, like, oh, he's a dick. He's just a dick. I'm like, he I don't know. He does seem like he's trying.
I mean, he is. He absolutely can be a dick on occasion, but like, because part of it is illogical. So, for example, like I say, he's pragmatic to a degree. But for example, his refusal to work with Rabute Gilliman completely, and he hides information from him. Makes a lot of sense. But the Emperor built that into the Dark Angels. This secrecy. Yeah. He built into the Dark Angels at their core this organization that would have secrets within secrets within secrets. And so when it comes to the Lion working with Gilliman, he's a dick because he doesn't know anything else. And I just love that about him. I just find that interesting.
It's that whole secrecy thing, that ability to keep secrets and understanding tactics above all else. It's actually one of the reasons why Lion is one of the only Primarchs to get along with Alpharius. Alpharius Omegon, aside from Horus. Like, they actually do work well together. Like, I think it's them and the Iron Hands actually are able to work with the Alpha Legion instead of just openly despising them for trying to be, efficient and using really good tactics. Like, wow. Yeah. But, I think there are other instances where the Lion seems to really struggle. Like, there is the whole thing with Lehman Russ. Like, they get into, like, a wrestling match over the fact they get into a big wrestling match over the fact that Lion killed this guy who insulted Russ for, like, a full day and a night. Then Russ just bursts out laughing because it's such a silly situation. And Lion, true to the autistic coded form. Like, that's the thing. It's called coding. Like, in this like whole media thing, coding. When you don't openly say a character is something or has something, but you show that they do. He just doesn't understand what's funny about it. It does seem like a silly situation. Like, two brothers just start fighting over something trivial. It's like when you and a sibling get into a fight over like a small, like one, like half a biscuit or something. And then you just start laughing because, like, what the fuck are we on about? And Lion's like, I don't see what's funny. And he just punches Russ in the face and knocks him out.
Well, so the important part of that story is that Russ had the fight starts because Russ sucker punches the lion.
Yeah, like, you started
ends because the lion punches Russ. And so that
I don't care who started it. I'm gonna finish it.
There's a chant the Dark Angels always say to the wolves about, there were 2 punches thrown that day, and only 1 Primarch goes down. But the relationship with Russ I find fascinating. So, and this is a big win for you Space Wolf fans if you're listening. So, like the fascinating thing about that story is that from the lion's point of view, he kind of like sees himself as the victor. So, like, as we just saw, like, Russ sucker punches the lion stays standing. The lion sucker punches Russ, he goes down fundamentally. But then there's this
Cope.
And we see this from Leman Russ's point of view. By the time we are post Siege of Terror, which we do see in his Primarch novel, he's actually got a lot of love for the lion. And it's really quite sweet. And the lion clearly has a lot of love for Russ because the lion actually finds out about the existence of the Wolfen, and he knows what a threat this would be to the Space Wolves' existence because the Emperor might just decide to exterminate them. Yeah. So the lion actually never tells anyone, which is really sweet. And the Leman Russ looks back on their time very fondly. But what's particularly interesting
they do fight again though, right? Like,
kind of. So what happens is after the Siege of Terror, the lion obviously has been purging the traitor planets, and he finally makes it to Terra. Leman Russ has finally recovered after his battle with Horus Lupercal, and they're basically on the planet, which is just rubble at this point, and they're just Space Wolves and Dark Angels wailing in the streets. The idea that the Emperor has been brought low, and it's so beautiful to me because it's this idea of like that they are brothers. They're just brothers, and they just fight and they argue. And Lionel Johnson, because he doesn't have this kind of emotional grounding, he needs some sort of therapist. He doesn't actually understand how to process these emotions, and so he's on the planet and he's just devastated because he adores his father so much, and then he sees Leman Russ. And you can just imagine it's just like the only thing he can attach to is that kind of like brotherly rivalry. Yeah. And so the first thing he just does, and there's just no reason to do this, but like if you've ever had to grieve for anything, people grieve in very weird ways, and it brings out both sides of you. And so he just challenges Russ to a fight, and he's like, "Come on, then." Like, let's finish it. Like, this is your fault. I don't know why, but this is your fault. And like, he's trying to get. And Russ says no. Russ is just kind of like, I'm not fighting you, man. Like not today. Like I'm not doing that.
I'm not feeling it, man.
It's enough of our brothers have died. Like, let's just end this. And the lion draws his sword and he's like, come on, like fight me, because he's like you say, he's only comfortable on the battlefield. He just wants to fight. He just wants to fight. He wants to do something because he doesn't want to approach his emotions. And he actually stabs Leman Russ. Through the chest, and he actually goes straight for his heart, and because he's a Primarch with super reactions, he actually turns the blade away at the last second to avoid his heart. So it lays Leman Russ low. And what you kind of realize when you read this book is that from the Lion's point of view and the Dark Angels, because the Dark Angels are very snobbish, I do not deny that. They think they're like they've won, and they think they're the superior legion and blah blah blah. But from the reader's point of view, these are two brothers who are both vastly immature and cannot process their emotions. But of the two of them, only Leman Russ really actually matures. And by the time we get to like post Horus Heresy Leman Russ, and as he has his kind of last meal and makes the Wolf Time speech, a lot of people like to liken it to like a Thor to Odin transition. He's really matured. And actually, if we get a 40k lion, he won't be that. The lion needs a bunch of character development to actually become something, that would approach the maturity of Leman Russ. And I find that fascinating.
This actually is incredibly I actually never knew that, because funny thing about me, I haven't read any fucking Primarch books.
Oh, they're
like,
really
aside
good.
from-
They're quite short actually as
yeah.
well, so they're quite nice to read.
I have Alfarius, Head of the Hydra, on my list to listen to, because my latest hyperfixation is the Alpha Legion. But like, I actually never realized that. Like, that's a really good point. Like, I've known people who are like that. Like, when they're really hurting or really grieving, they're just like, I'm just gonna fight somebody. I'm just gonna, like, you scream and just like punch a wall.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I totally.
Absolutely. It's like that. Yeah.
It totally resonates with me. Like the Dark Angels generally do. Like people people love the idea to, like, joke about the Dark Angels being traitors. But I find it one of the most interesting things, and it's this idea, because one of the really kind of interesting things about the Horus Heresy, a bit of a spoiler warning, but we find out actually like half of the White Scars turn traitorous as well. And so, like, when that happens, of course, that was interesting because we didn't realize that was so bad amongst the White Scars. But also, it kind of casts a light on the Dark Angels. Like, hang on, but the White Scars
wasn't just you,
exterminators. So what is it? But you know what? That's actually it kind of. The more I think about it, it just makes sense to me. It resonates with me because it's this idea that, like, if you've ever fucked up, if you ever really fucked up, you feel bad and you're like, oh crap, I've made a mistake. No qualms with it. But like, if you can take that on and move forward, you might, you can move on eventually. But like, if you just try and cover it up and deny it, and you
never get
let
over
it twist you and warp you, ultimately
you just wallow in guilt.
Exactly. Wallow in your guilt. Eventually, that mistake ends up just deforming you into something that you never wanted to be. And like, I get that with the Dark Angels. I totally do. Like, I think a lot of people can in their personal lives. So I find them.
There are entire fan fictions that the main premise is just the Primarchs getting therapy or like some sort of counseling. There's entire fan fictions because so many people see this and they're like, ugh! And like, that whole guilt thing, it does hit the lion hard, because like, guilt is something that repeatedly comes up for him, and I totally feel that. I'm that kind of person who really takes that guilt onto himself. Like, a big thing is when he fights Kurz, and Kurz tries to give him all this heebie-jeebie prophetic shit, like, and it just, eventually it does start to get to the lion that Kurz can see the future, so he stops Sanguinius from killing a captured Conrad Kurz, and says, hey, we'll just keep him here and, like, pump him for prophecies. They essentially just try to, like, milk him for prophecies about the heresy, but he's so fucking uncooperative because it's Kurz. He's not gonna cooperate. Like,
so what actually is really interesting to see. So, they actually, the Guilliman, Sanguinius, and the Lion are in Imperium Secundus, and one of the reasons they're not desperately trying to get out is because the default assumption is kind of that the Emperor has been killed
dead
because the Astronomicon has gone out. But then
that was actually because like a warp storm had been put up by Lorgar. Essentially, like, imagine it's like, imagine if someone just puts like a sheet over your outside window. You're like, fuck, the rest of the world has ended. It's like it's like putting a blanket over a bird's cage. You can't see anything. It must be nighttime.
And what happens is
You're not even trying to verify.
And what happens is Lionel Johnson actually is on the Invincible Reason, and he's basically been kicked out of Imperium Secundus, and he all of a sudden starts thinking through the stuff that Conrad Kurz has said, and he realizes that actually he can see the future. Now, the reason that that's so interesting is because Conrad Kurz has always maintained that one day the Emperor will send someone to kill him, and so if that's going to happen, that means the Emperor is currently alive. So Lionel Johnson
good point.
Teleports back in and says, guys, this means the Emperor is still alive, and thus the Blood Angels make it to Terra, and we know what happens next.
Yes, what happens next? A few things. Eventually we'll get to those in an episode in case anyone doesn't know. But like, during that time, the Dark Angels and Lion, they couldn't actually make it to Terra. So they just sort of started raiding and doing their best to tactically delay reinforcements to the siege. Which is good. There's another
impact, actually. So one of the things that the Lion realizes during the Horus Heresy, and he's kind of like the first Primarch to properly kind of grasp this, outside of Magnus and whoever, but he starts to understand how the warp is a reflection of this reality. And so, for example, he commits exterminatus on a world that therefore weakens a demon wall nearby, because he realizes that this
they're
wall
feeding off the
is being fed off, right? And so one of the things that he realizes is that if he goes and destroys the traitor homeworlds, this will really weaken the traitor legions.
It'll start to fuck with them.
And
so he actually destroys
we really see that
Barbarous.
effect.
It's
So-
Barbarous for the Death Guard, and I think one other one.
I think he gets through most of them, and so for example, we really start to see that effect. So for example, Sanguinius actually starts to see through the eyes of Angron in the Heresy using his kind of unique gifts, and he actually sees Nuceria being destroyed, and the effect this has on both the strength of the World Eaters, but also their kind of cognitive presence and Horus's ability to control them, and so the fact that the traitor legions kind of, I mean, big spoiler for Horus Heresy, but the fact that Horus basically loses control of almost everybody by the end of the Siege of Terra. So no, Perturabo fucks off. He's gone.
Does he?
Yeah, he just bows out. And one of the reasons that happens is because Lionel Johnson destroys the traitor homeworlds, and so same with Emperor's Children, for example.
Oh, the Emperor's Children were kind of fucked from the word go, if I'm being honest. But like, there is one he does have a fair share of notable fuck ups. Like, I think this is one thing that I think is hilarious, where the Lion, when the rebellion first broke out, Lion thought, oh, you know what, this isn't gonna last. Listen, they are Horus's rebellion, it's gonna fall flat. We're perfect, we're the good guys, we're gonna win, obviously. And he had actually been told previously, hey, we want you to be War Master. That's the thing people forget, is that Lion was almost certainly going to be War Master, but then his inability to act as like a proper diplomat and really have the charisma of Horus is kind of what hampered him in that regard. And he lost so many Dark Angels during the Rangdan Genocides. He was approached by an Alpha Legionary claiming to be Alfarius, who had said, yeah, I'm Alfarius, but don't worry, our Primarch hasn't been discovered yet. Okay, yeah, sure, bullshit. But, like, after the rebellion had broken out, he said, oh, you know what? We're gonna need a new War Master. It's obviously gonna be me, but I need to start bargaining with my brothers to get people on side early. So he had actually seized a depot of really powerful high-tech siege weapons from like the Dark Age of technology. And that's the thing with him. He was a good appreciator of this really old tech. But what he did with it is he gave it to one of his brothers to sort of buy his favor and sort of buy his vote for the nomination to War Master. So he said, here, Perturabo, take all these hardcore Dark Age of technology siege weapons. Here. And Perturabo's like, yeah, I'll take this. Wink, wink, fuck. Like you read that, and it's just like, oh god.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it is. But you got to remember, everyone was taken surprised by.
Here's the thing, like I've had a friend who's been in that situation. Like I had a stalker briefly, like a girl who I went to high school with, who was completely obsessed with me. She got my phone number and started leaving me voice messages on WhatsApp and started leaving me emails. I'm like, how the fuck did she get these numbers? And then a friend of mine is like, oh yeah, she asked me, I gave it to her. She said she had like something for you or something. I'm like, oh god, man. Wow, it's one of those things that tears you up.
That's not good.
Don't worry, I dealt with the situation. Like it was a weird situation. I didn't know how to deal with the situation. Much like the Lion, I did not know how to fucking tackle that situation. But like, I think that sort of plays into Lionel Johnson's guilt. Like that was a big fuck up, and that those siege engines did really come in handy during the Siege of Terra, and he blames himself. Like, I think all the Primarchs who couldn't get to Terra in time, he goes back to Caliban, to sort of just regroup his forces and to just sulk. He literally basically admits that. He's like, I want to go home. I need a good cry. I need to cry. And then he's trying to hold it together for the sake of his legion. You know, he's really trying to, put on the brave face. Things are bad, but things get better. I just need a minute. He gets back to Caliban and is immediately fired upon because the entire planet's gone into fucking revolt, and he just falls apart. And like, I think that grief is part of the reason why Luther was able to essentially mortally wound him in combat. And the whole thing with Luther is honestly nuts. Luther is actually a really interesting character unto himself. But the Lion was mortally wounded. he actually could, in sort of that Horus style situation, he was gonna kill Luthor. He was gonna defeat him, but couldn't bring himself to. He had actually. Here's the thing.
The Emperor.
Part of the reason why I say autistic is because he's actually able to learn and grow as he starts to understand things more. Like, for autistic people, it takes practice and development, like over the course of things, after his row with Gilliman, because he couldn't understand why Gilliman was so mad at him for bombarding part of the planet's surface. He's like, what? I got the thing done. Why are you mad at me? But then after his sword got
he did understand. He just knew. This is the thing. That's a big difference between Gilliman and the Lion, and why Gilliman returning to this. Sorry, the Lion returning to the setting would be more interesting, because the Lion understands that. He understands why Gilliman wouldn't want his planet bombed, but like, it had to be done.
Yeah,
Kurz was killing millions upon millions of people.
Yeah.
Like, it had to be done. Like, under Gilliman, things just won't get fixed. So
but like, you think someone else would have been a little more diplomatic about it, but like, that's what I'm saying. He's not completely unreasonable, but there's like a block there, and like, that's something I've seen in people with that condition. And like, he starts to sort of really sort of second guess some of his decisions, and he starts to actually reconsider having sent Luthor away, for Luthor having essentially almost let an atomic bomb, because he's like, man, Luthor didn't betray me. He was just jealous. He almost betrayed me, but he came through at the last second. And like, that's what counts. So he starts to second guess it, but he doesn't have the time to get back to Luthor and tell him, hey, come back. But in that time, it was already too late. So everything just went from bad to worse for the Lion, and you sort of start to see things just kept getting worse and worse near the end of things.
I think he certainly misses his friend, but I think he just doesn't. The thing is, that's something I don't think any of us would really know. Like, how would you handle the situation with Luthor?
Oh yeah.
So,
but you can see that you can see that deterioration in the Lion's sort of condition and his state as things just keep going bad. The heresy's going bad. He thought the Emperor was dead. He fell out with Gilliman. And then the whole thing with Luthor, and then then the Siege of Terra was barely repelled, and the Emperor is interred. Like, he just wants to go home and just take a minute. And then, like, I've had that, like, where, like, I'm like, man, I just need to go home, I just need to take a minute, and then you get a phone call, and you're like, you just, fuck! It's the worst thing. Like, again, you can really understand a lot. I think he's actually one of the most human characters because of his flaws, and because of, like, those things he doesn't understand. So he's one of only 2 Primarchs up until recently who has been confirmed to be alive in the setting. Loyalist Primarchs, anyway, who have been confirmed to be alive in the setting. He's just like, it was the same as Gilliman, where he was just sort of in stasis, waiting to heal. Like, almost the exact same situation as Gilliman. So he was stuck in stasis, and it's for that reason a lot of people have always speculated that he was either going to be the first Primarch to come back, or he's almost certainly going to be the next one to come back.
I mean, he certainly had the most. He certainly had the most lore around him coming back. So
it just makes sense. Like, it just makes sense.
It also makes a lot of sense that the Fallen storyline has been done to death. I don't think anybody will. I mean, not anyone will miss it, but I don't think anybody really wants any more books to come from it. The Unforgiven novel is basically just the story of the Dark Angels. It's been written. We kind of know. It ties up a lot of the loose ends. We know what the deal with the Dark Angels is. We know what's happened with the Lion. There's a couple of minor details we don't know a lot about. So the Lion supposedly gets sucked into the warp for like half a second, and it comes back out in the old lore. We don't really know what that was about. There's lots of little things like that. But the general idea with the Dark Angels, we know. And we know their story. And compared to something like Vulcan or Jagatai Khan, there's still a lot of mystery around their disappearance. But the Lion, we kind of know everything, so it's just GW can just pull the trigger whenever. Gilliman has also spoken to the Emperor, who canonically has always known the Lion is still alive. He's said to be healed. The Watchers in the Dark, I'm assuming, could also bring him back. It's basically just waiting for GW to pull that trigger, and that is most likely driven by financial reasons at this point.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
They're just gonna keep blue balling us until everyone loses interest in Gilliman.
I think he's coming back at 10. I think he's coming back in 10th edition. I think that's going to be.
Probably.
Quick.
That's probably when it's going to come back. Yeah.
And the rumor mill is turning pretty high, and the Warhammer 40k rumor mill is a fascinating thing for me because it is honestly correct more often than people would like to admit, and I think it's probably dead on the money. When all of like these YouTube accounts that have their rumor mills and their whatever connections that they have, I don't know how it works. When they all say the same thing, all of a sudden, it's probably gonna happen. Yeah.
There's a lot of people in the YouTube community who do have some like internal connections with some of the brains at GW, so you can tell he's coming back, and I think that's going to be interesting because like him having to play off Gilliman, I'm waiting for him to wake up, see that Luther's body is fucking gone, see that the galaxy is like torn in half, and just think like, oh man, that was a good sleep. I wonder how everything is. Fuck.
Well, that's one of the things I find most interesting about
he's
him.
Gonna be so mad.
The idea of him coming back is kind of fascinating because I spoke about him on Terror and with Russ, so he is like emotionally broken by the essential kind of death of his father, and then he comes back to Caliban, and his best friend has betrayed him. Half his sons have turned against him, which in of itself is particularly devastating because this idea that the Dark Angels are kind of like this perfect force, and in the Heresy there's this thing with Gilliman where the Dark Angels are so perfectly drilled and everything they do is so magnificent, and actually to find out that that's all just a lie, and they're not this perfect force.
It's like when you find out that half of the jock team is doing
regularly talks about loyalty, and the idea that half of the sons turn traitor I could see him coming back, and even though his kind of like body is healed, he's still emotionally just kind of broken, and probably, I think there's going to be a significant amount of, for example, if they brought the Lion back and he just immediately decided to return to the fray and lead the Dark Angels in a glorious battle against let's say the World Eaters,
like how Gilliman
that in itself wouldn't make sense. Because
like how Gilliman did during the Plague Wars.
I would be like, well, you guys have skipped over loads of narrative here. You've skipped over this idea that like he's got to tackle these things that happen to him. I want to read about what he actually does, finding out that the Dark Angels are these twisted, messed up things. Now then, it's not the Dark Angels Legion of old. It's this twisted, fucked up thing that regularly sacrifices other assets of the Imperium to accomplish their own ends.
To keep their secrets.
Every single one has fallen further away from this kind of ideal of the Dark Angels.
I hate to fucking tell you, man. The problem is you say that's what you want. I don't think that's what's gonna happen. Just like knowing GW, like the word bearers are probably gonna show up to try and destroy the Rock, or there's gonna be an invasion of demons, and he's gonna burst through and say, you know what, it's time to get to action, and just start swinging.
I'm fine with him coming back and having a big fight initially.
I'm sorry,
kind of like being a big factor in that initial fight, whatever that is. But then he needs the process. He can't just then immediately, head straight to Terror. If he said straight to Terror, that's for his own aims. He's not going to kind of assume the role of Imperium, Lord Commander of the Imperium like Gilliman.
Again, like the people have made memes about that, is like how those two might just immediately come to blows the second the Lion comes back.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that is that I find fascinating about their relationship it's wonderful, is in Unremembered Empire, there's this bit where Gilliman talks about how he looks up to and he likes a lot of his brothers, and he can learn a lot from most of the Primarchs, but there's only two brothers that he properly looks up to and admires. And those are Horus Lupercal and Lionel Johnson. And that's a big deal. The Dauntless Few appear in that. Sanguinius isn't one of those brothers, but the Lion is. That's how impressive Lionel Johnson is in the eyes of Rabute Gilliman. And yet, a couple of chapters before or after or something, he also said, when he finds out the Lion's returning, he also says, and of all of my brothers, why did it have to be the Lion that comes back? And that's a fascinating relationship. The idea that you can admire someone that much, but also you just I can't work with this guy. Oh, God. He's just too much.
You know what? Yeah, you know what that's called? That's called being siblings. That's what that is.
Maybe.
That's called being siblings. And the thing with the Lion is he is really admirable. He's completely uncorruptible. One of the it was a lord of a changer of ways, one of the greater demons of Tzeentch.
Kairos, Fate Weaver.
Fate Weaver tried to tempt him and do that finger wavy bullshit to try and lure him into chaos. And he probes into the Lion's mind, and his first thought is just fuck, because there's nothing in there to work with. He realizes, wow, I can't do shit with. I can't fucking work with this. And
Yeah, you get-
Lion stabs him through the chest with the sword and says, "Yeah, bet you didn't see that coming, bitch."
Yeah, that's a great quip.
Aha!
Yeah,
That's
no, that was a
great.
good line.
The Gilliman never really hated Lion or turned against him or anything, but he did have to sort of kick him out of the Imperium Secundus for the whole orbital bombardment thing. But the Lion actually came back and sort of redeemed himself almost immediately, really.
Yes,
Like the friction, but the friction between Gilliman and Lion, it does seem very sibling-esque, and I think that would be really interesting to see more of.
Yeah, I mean, because it's one of those things, you know, before, it's one of those things where, like, I mean, you can dice up however you want, Gilliman, but like fundamentally, the Lion is right. If they had left Kurz on Macragge somewhere, he would have just kept murdering people, and they would never have caught him. There was basically one way to capture a man who can see the future, and that was the only way.
Flush him out with orbital
the Lion,
bombardment.
Gilliman would just not be prepared to do that. That's there's a big difference between the two because they're very similar as Primarchs go.
I think that might actually be one of the points of friction when Lion comes back. Lion's going to be ready to do fucking anything. He's going to be like, all right, just throw everything at the enemy, let's go. While Gilliman's going to be maybe a little more...
I spoke about how the Lion's like... Because all the Primarchs have roles. The Emperor designed them with certain roles. So, for example, Conrad Kurz was said to be the judge. It's got a fascinating idea, really. But, like, so the Lion has to... He's going to have to make that calculation, right? And the Lion's Primarch novel is not that old, so, you know, this is very recent lore, so I'm assuming they've written it with this in mind. When the Lion comes back, he's going to have to ask himself, is this the time for me to wipe the galaxy clean? Is that what the Emperor wants him to do? They still have the invincible reason. They still have all of this incredible technology. It might well be the case that the Dark Angels have the technology to just slaughter, you know, trillions of humans. And I assume he'll have to say no to that because that would end the game very quickly. But it's certainly an interesting idea.
Like that's part of the reason, like that, like the whole thing being the Exterminator and that ability to keep a secret. It's why the Cabal actually first wanted to contact him and the Dark Angels, but essentially settled on talking with the Alpha Legion instead. But yeah, like it's all very interesting, and I think the Lion. I agree with you. I think the Lion's return is absolutely inevitable. I think he's absolutely a very interesting character. But yeah, wrapping things up. Before we go, anything you want to talk to the audience? Maybe you want to plug anything you're doing?
No, not. I mean, I have the YouTube channel, so you can come.
Absolutely, links to that in the description, of course.
Yeah, listen to me there. So yeah, the Sandman 40k on YouTube. I do have my own podcast as well. I do with some friends called the Conclave 40k. But yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on. I always love to talk about the Dark Angels. So
oh yeah, clearly, yeah. This is a very fun. Like there were moments like here where you're just like going and going. I'm like, oh shit, because I did not know a lot of this actually. I that's the problem. I've only read one book from the Horus Heresy. That's a disgrace on my part.
Yeah,
it's a disgrace. I mean, it's Legion by Dan Abnett, by the way, because I'm an Alpha Legion nerd. But yeah, Legion. That's the only full book I've read. I've read a couple short stories. Yeah. But yeah, I hearing all this. Fuck, I really need to get into the Primarch books.
They actually have depth. Like, that's the thing. That's my big sell on the Dark Angels, because people often, you know, there's a lot of memes about the Dark Angels. If you're going to collect this faction, you have to be very prepared for those. But, like, that's the big thing that clinches me, is they are genuinely interesting. So many of the Space Marines are, you know, unfortunately, a bit one-dimensional, and that's not to say other dimensions can't be written about them, but there's just not a lot of lore on their various aspects. But the Dark Angels, like, if the Dark Angels were one character, I would find that character interesting. And like, just the idea is like, oh, this is our character Ben. He is the most noble person that's ever existed, and he's just kind of good at everything. Like, it's just not that interesting. But you want someone with actual flaws.
Ben and his blue armor with the big
exactly
symbol.
Yeah, exactly.
Who is Ben? Gee, fuck. Let's
yeah. No, 100%. And they're also just the coolest looking.
Oh yeah, the Dark Angel's aesthetic, and I think the Lion's armor, I think, is actually some of my favorite. He sort of has that sort of almost like winged hussar kind of. Oh yeah, the very medieval, almost like that square kind of Crusader helmet. It's really good. His model is good.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't really spoken a lot about the the kind of the companies and the wings, as that used to be called in the Dark Angels. But it's
I think
a
I'll
really
save that.
cool aspect.
We'll save that for the like an episode about the Dark Angels Legion itself, because they've actually had a lot of things going on their own, and I would absolutely like to talk about the Dark Angels and what's been going on with some of the Fallen. And if I ever do get to that, I think it would be awesome to have you on, if you'd be interested.
Yeah, I'd love to.
This has, I think, been a great episode. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, thank you.